Patrice, and today I'm just gonna go through how I approached the mix for Jeanine Ruiz's and Shaquille Noel's drum solo. And the reason why I say is Jeanine Ruiz and Shaquille Noel. Initially, Shaquille Noel did the solo with a click track, I would have believed, or a metronome. And then Jeanine, she took the solo, bare drums, nothing else, and she added this collage of harmonies and melodies, which made it even more grand. So the awesome playing of Shaquille combined with the lovely arrangement from Jeanine, and there was this lovely masterpiece. So shout out to Jeanine, shout out to Shaquille Noel, and shout out to KAW Drums, who was responsible for putting on this drum solo in the first place. Lovely snares, I love your snares. It certainly sounds good on recordings. If you haven't heard this entire track, go check them out now. I'm just going to give a sneak peek today, and we'll head into the first thing I addressed when I started this mix. Right. So that was what I worked with, and I actually love how the mix came out. And so we're gonna look at the drum track today. So let's sew this and get into it. So I'm just gonna play the drums with and without my processing, so you'll get an idea of the differences, and then I'll go through as I go along, right? Right. So we're going to do that same thing, but within the context of the mix. So you'd get to understand the decisions that I made as well. Right. I got the stereo track, the stereo drum track from KW, and it was well mixed, so it was easy to work with. However, there were some things that I needed to do in order for it to sit back in the mix, because I didn't intend for the drum to just be the centerpiece of the track. I wanted it to actually fall back within the entire arrangement, so that you could hear the melodies as well as hear and feel the rhythm coming through. And as I said, I wanted that tape sound, that old orchestra recording sound. So let's go into it. So the first plugin that I had here was the SPL Deverb by Plugin Alliance. What this did for me was it helped tame the room that the drums was recorded in. So I believe the room was not padded based on the video. It was the workshop, and therefore you would have gotten a lot of room sound in the drums. So I decided just to take out a little bit, because the input was way too much, right? So I hope you can hear the subtle changes. It's very subtle, right? So but it's mainly more noticeable when I add compression. And it was at the compression stage when I decided, hey, I need to remove some room from this drums, because then I wanted to add my own room to kind of place it within the mix itself, right? So this was what I did. Well, it's the first step now, but it was actually the last step then. Then I sent it to a Kramer tape to get the tape finish, that tape sound. Uh, Initially, I went with a tube plugin to give that tube saturation. I loved it. The harmonic saturation was amazing, except it drove the signal a little too much and it raised the room level. And I could not work with that. So I decided to go with something a little more subtle that would give me the saturation without increasing the gain, right? And I used the Kramer tape. I set it on 7.5 inches per second speed, and I just boosted the recording level just a tiny bit. And as it's linked, the playback will compensate by removing the same amount of level just a tiny bit. And this added a nice warm sound to it, and the 7.5 IPS kind of helped round off some of the highs and lows to make it a little more dull and a little more lo-fi, old school kind of vibe. Yeah. So this is what it sounds like. Right, so there you could hear like some of the sizzle on the or the air on the hi-hats and the cymbals kind of comes, it rolls off, even on the drums, the air on the snare actually kind of rolls off as well. And it gives that kind of warm mid presence. Yeah, so this is exactly what I was looking for together with the light saturation. So my next selection was the Fab Filter. I love Fab Filter Pro MB. What I did with this was that between 453 and 2700 hertz, the snare was coming across a little too harsh, so I needed to soften up the snare. Now, the difference between this and a static EQ was that I didn't want the snare to always play without these frequencies, this broadband here, right? But because he was very dynamic in his playing, I wanted that to be represented accurately while having control of these particular frequencies, same as the kick. And again, this is a stereo file, so there isn't anything much I can do for the individual tracks. So this was the best decision that I could have made, or at least at the time, to deal with this. The next best decision would be a dynamic EQ, but this actually worked really well. So let's hear what this sounds like. So I'm just going to solo the frequencies that is actually playing on the snare. So it actually softens the snare a little bit within the context of the mix, right? Then I went straight to the Q2, the Pro Q2 Fab Filter again, and I just did a basic low cut, right? Now, as you can see, there isn't much EQing going on the drums because it was mixed well. The only thing that I did by way of EQ was just dynamically control certain frequencies and then remove some of the lower end frequencies, right? Now, some may tend to put the Q2 before the MB. I don't know. That was just what I was working with at the time, and it felt right. So straight out of the Q2, I went to one of my favorite compressors, the Elysia Alpha compressor. This is a lovely compressor, very transparent, very smooth. You could crank it, it sounds really nice. You can, I don't know, like this is a wonderful compressor. I wish I could use the hardware unit to actually hear it in person, but as for now, this is what I have. But it sounds real. Now, what I used this for was mainly for control of the loud hits, to make sure that it doesn't jump too far out of the mix within the context of the mix, right? So every decision I made was within the context of the mix. So here's how it sounds. It's very subtle, just probably 2 dB of compression for the most. So generally, you would see that I didn't do much gain compensation because this was just the peaks I was cutting off. There wasn't much information being compressed on this drum track, right? The attack was fairly quick, 21 milliseconds, 21.5 milliseconds. The release as well, fairly quick, 149.5 milliseconds. And that was okay because of what I was cutting off. I wasn't squashing the drums, so this actually worked pretty well, right? Yeah, the threshold just enough to catch that 1 to 2 dB peak level, yeah. And that is what I did for the drums. So I'm gonna do a before and after one more time. Yeah, so that's how I approach the drums for this track. And if you have any differing ideas or opinions, please leave it down in the comments. If you like what I did and want to know more, please leave it down in the comments as well. Share and like. Simple as that. So until the next time.